All right, let's dive right into today's explainer because we're looking at a really profound and frankly kind of startling paradox. We're asking, why is the most educated, modernized, and hyper-connected generation in India's history, Gen Z, still actively perpetuating the ancient caste system? Now, you'd naturally assume that with unprecedented global exposure, the entire internet at their fingertips, and a vastly liberalized education system, these ancient social divides would just naturally vanish into the history books, right? But as you'll see, the data tells a very different and much more complicated story.
So, we're going to break this mystery down into 5 parts. 1. The Gen Z paradox. 2. Origins and DNA evidence. 3. Modern drivers of caste. 4. The invisible walls. And finally, 5. Breaking the cycle. Let's get into it. Starting off with Section 1, the Gen Z paradox, or the illusion of a post-caste youth. We really have to shatter this idea that modernization automatically erases outdated social systems. To understand the stark reality of modern campuses, just consider this quote: Dalit and Shamar leave the country. Now, that wasn't written a century ago. That was actually written on the walls of a hostel in a top university today. Even in elite educational institutes like the IITs and IIMs, places that literally represent the absolute pinnacle of Indian modernization and intellect, reports of caste-based incidents are actually rising. We're seeing videos of young people hurling slurs, forcing marginalized youth into humiliating acts, and actively participating in discrimination. So these aren't just relics of the past. They're active, ongoing parts of modern Gen Z culture. 60,000. That is the staggering number of registered abuse cases against scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities in India recently. And honestly, keep in mind that number doesn't even include data from all depressed castes, nor does it account for the countless incidents that go completely unreported out of fear. It just proves this isn't some abstract sociological concept debated in a classroom somewhere. It's a tangible, deeply ingrained, and often violent reality that young people are witnessing and participating in every single day. Moving to Section 2, Origins and DNA Evidence, the science of segregation. To deeply understand the present, we've got to look at how this builds from ancient historical texts right into our very genetics. The timeline of how this system evolved is absolutely crucial because it highlights a massive structural shift. If we look way back at the earliest references in texts like the Rig Veda and the Bhagavad Gita, they suggest that caste, or varna, was initially fluid. It was based on an individual's qualities, their personal merit, and their occupation, not just the family they happened to be born into. Back then, people actually married across these groups based on merit. But then, a drastic shift happened. Around 1700 to 1900 years ago, strict marriage rules essentially froze these castes into permanence. It stopped being about what you did and became entirely about who your parents were. Fast forward centuries later to 1901, and the British colonial government used formal census data to further rigidify, categorize, and permanently label these identities as a strategic way to divide and rule the population. And that massive historical snowball brings us right to today, where we see Gen Z literally fighting caste wars on social media. But you might be wondering, how can we be so absolutely certain about exactly when that ancient fluidity stopped? Well, the answer lies in our actual biology. Harvard scientists used a genetic analysis method called linkage disequilibrium decay to scan 132 Indian genomes across 25 different caste and tribal groups. Now, to understand how this works, think of it like shuffling a brand new deck of cards. At first, you get large chunks of identical suits stuck together, but over generations of continuous shuffling, those large chunks break down and scatter into smaller and smaller pieces. When the scientists looked at the DNA, they found plenty of small, highly scattered ancient fragments, which proves that diverse groups definitely used to mix freely. But large, new fragments from recent mixing, they were completely missing. This scientific data provides undeniable biological proof that around 1900 years ago, large-scale intermixing abruptly stopped. The system became permanent through endogamy, which is the strict practice of marrying only within one specific group. So caste literally stopped being just a social construct and became encoded in the DNA. But why did India's system survive for 2 millennia when others didn't? When you compare ancient civilizations, almost all of them had strict occupational hierarchies, right? Europe had feudalism, Japan had the Edo period class system, but those were state-driven. They were strictly enforced by kings and emperors. So when those states fell or when revolutions happened, the system collapsed with them. In India, however, the occupational hierarchy merged seamlessly with religion. Texts like the Manusmriti made the rules incredibly rigid. Going against your caste wasn't just breaking a state law that could be rewritten, it was heavily framed as a profound sin against your religion. It shifted from being a legal requirement to a moral, birth-based mandate. And this incredible psychological shift is exactly what allowed the system to survive the rise and fall of countless empires, invasions, and eventual modernization.
Which brings us to Section 3, Modern Drivers of Caste, the politics and policies. What are the modern pillars that are actively incentivizing and sustaining this ancient system today?
Let's be real, there are massive modern catalysts keeping this alive right now. First, we have a hyper-engaged Gen Z. But in a massive stroke of irony, instead of dismantling caste with their global connectivity, they're weaponizing modern tools like Instagram and TikTok to fight real wars. They're creating viral trending songs, flashy video edits, and entire social media movements specifically boasting about their own caste supremacy. It's basically ancient bigotry repackaged in high-definition video formats. Second, democracy itself is heavily influenced by it. 30 to 40% of Indian voters openly admit they cast their ballots based on caste. And politicians know this perfectly well. They actively select their candidates, distribute tickets, and form their governmental cabinets based purely on matching specific caste demographics in a region. So it turns out that when the entire political machinery heavily relies on caste identity to mobilize youth and secure vital votes, the society itself simply cannot become caste-free. And we simply cannot talk about modern drivers without looking at the most visible interaction youth have with caste, the reservation system. Let's dive into this highly debated topic impartially, because both sides represent intense daily realities for Gen Z. On one side, we have the general category perspective. Imagine a 22-year-old student taking a hyper-competitive entrance exam. They face severely limited seats, a looming crisis of youth unemployment, and significantly higher score cutoffs, sometimes requiring an 85% score compared to much lower thresholds for others. To them, the system feels fundamentally unfair, penalizing them for their birth and breeding deep resentment. Now look at the other side, the depressed caste perspective. Data consistently shows that upper castes still heavily dominate white-collar jobs, corporate boardrooms, and hold exponentially more ancestral wealth. For marginalized communities, reservations aren't a perk. They are a necessary, systemic catch-up mechanism to account for thousands of years of denied education, ongoing brutal discrimination, and massive wealth disparities. Both sides represent valid, undeniable modern realities that make caste an active factor in shaping a young person's future every single day. Section 4, the invisible walls, the systematic filtration. This is where we uncover the subconscious ways caste operates in our daily lives, often without us even realizing it.
Check out this matrimonial data. A massive 2019 study analyzed over 300,000 matrimonial profiles, and the numbers are absolutely staggering. Only 23% of modern, educated, internet-savvy profiles even stated a willingness to marry outside their caste. A massive 77% explicitly prefer to stay within their exact same caste group. And remember, this is just what people are willing to admit publicly online. In real-life practice, the actual executed inter-caste marriage numbers hover at a tiny fraction of that. The adherence to ancient bloodlines is so strong that even when major matrimonial websites intentionally offer financial discounts to users who remove their caste filters, less than 1% of users actually accept the offer. People are literally willing to pay more money just to guarantee segregation. Let that sink in.
You know, you might think your current friend group, your neighborhood, or your professional network is just a happy coincidence of like-minded people finding each other, but it's not. Look at how these stages systematically filter us throughout our entire lives. First, childhood school fees act as a massive economic filter, subtly dictating your very first peer group based on ancestral wealth. Second, the locality or neighborhood your family can afford dictates your broader community exposure and exactly who you play with on the weekends. Third, your college and subsequent alumni network dictate your high-level career connections and professional opportunities. And finally, stage 4, endogamous same-caste marriage locks that entire highly filtered social circle tightly into place, ready to repeat the exact same process for the next generation. We walk around thinking these are purely personal choices, but they're actually powerful, systematic filters that silently segregate us into distinct social layers from childhood all the way to adulthood. Finally, Section 5, breaking the cycle. Let's talk about structural solutions and how we actually dismantle a system that survived for over 2 millennia and is practically written into our DNA.
The absolutely crucial point to take away from this entire analysis is that casteism is not just a bad mindset problem. You can't just tell people to be nicer or be less prejudiced and expect the issue to vanish. It's a highly robust, economically entrenched system of structural segregation. So we have to fundamentally reframe our understanding of the problem before we can ever hope to apply the right solutions. Deeply ingrained structural problems absolutely require structural solutions.
So what can Gen Z actually do to stop this ancient momentum? Here are the actionable steps forward. Number 1, and undeniably the most powerful, normalize inter-caste marriages. As visionary leaders like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar noted decades ago, mixing bloodlines collapses the very concept of caste purity and completely breaks the transfer of concentrated ancestral wealth within just a few generations. Second, we must impartially reevaluate economic divides and structural policies, like reservations, to ensure they actually heal disparities rather than deepening political divides. Third, stop the meme wars. We talked earlier about Gen Z using TikTok and Instagram to flaunt their caste. We absolutely have to stop turning supremacy into digital entertainment. Humor and irony bypass our critical moral guards, and that keeps ancient, violent divides alive in easily digestible modern formats. And finally, intentionally step outside your invisible bubble. Diversify your social exposure and build genuine, meaningful cross-caste relationships. Refuse to use a person's surname, their dietary habits, or their college lineage as a subconscious filter for respect. By actively pursuing these structural and social changes, the next generation actually has the unprecedented power to finally dismantle those invisible walls. So I'll leave you with this final provocative thought. Will caste be Gen Z's future or a forgotten past? Caste is not merely an outdated ideology. It is a brilliantly designed, self-replicating system of division. As the most educated, resourceful, and globally connected generation in human history, the choice of whether to unthinkingly repeat the system or to consciously and finally break it is entirely yours. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.